What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hello, you're listening to episode 9 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And today we are going to be talking all about dragons. Very, very exciting.
Very exciting. And joining us today to help us on our quest is a dragon rider and zooarchaeologist who we met on the road, Alex Fitzpatrick.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Hello. Hi. Thank you for joining us today, Alex. Lovely to meet you. What a coincidence to meet you on the road like this. I mean, it's you know, it's as if fate had purpose for us. So you are, as Ash mentioned, a zooarchaeologist, but what exactly is your specialism? How did you get into that topic?
So I am technically a zooarchaeologist of specifically later prehistoric Britain, expanding slightly into the medieval on accident. So real quick, when I started my PhD, I was told I was going to do later prehistoric Britain. And I spent all my time studying and learning all about later prehistoric Britain until we got the dates for 90% of the bones we were looking at. And wouldn't you know it, they turns out to all be medieval.
Oh,
so
no.
six months before I was supposed to hand in my PhD, I had to basically learn all about the medieval and post-medieval.
I mean, could you not have just done 2 PhDs, like one on like the theory of late prehistory, and then like a very short one on?
Yeah, strangely that was frowned upon.
Oh.
So yeah, I just learned real quick. But you know what? It was really interesting, and that's now, I guess, what I know.
Know everything. Well, yeah, that's great. And you mentioned you've finished the PhD. What are you working on right now? Are you still doing research?
So I'm finally writing up my PhD, and that's about as much of the archaeology I do now. I've kind of moved into museum researching, so not as bone-y, but still heritage-y. But I'm still doing a little bit of zooarch on the side, mainly through actually writing up all this stuff. The sad part about your PhD is you have to write it twice, basically.
Right?
Bad.
It would be so nice if you could just do like a podcast episode on it.
Yeah, and I've done many.
Yeah, true.
But they won't, I mean, I feel like they should, because, like in the UK at least, you can, do like a PhD by publication, right? You should be able to do a PhD by podcasting. It's 20.
Right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
We should find, and it can still be peer reviewed. You can still, because then you can have follow-ups. So you can do your thing. That's so open access as well. That's like a really nice, transparent way to do research, because you do your episode and then the reviews would come back and you'd be like, so these were the reviews. This is what I need to change. And yeah, it would be, I like that.
I like that too. It's easier, I think.
Yeah,
it's not like terrifying when you do like your Viva and all that kind of stuff too. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did my Viva at home because I obviously did it during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I was surrounded by cats at my mother-in-law's house. So that was really nice.
And at least then you can turn off the computer and just go and, collapse on the sofa and go, rather than having to then also go for drinks with people afterwards or something and try and be social.
Yeah, basically I turned off my laptop and I went headfirst into a cat.
Sounds ideal. I have my defense coming up. up next week, actually. Well, by the time this podcast goes out, hopefully it'll be done and dusted. But yes, slightly. Try not to think about it too much.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
It'll be okay. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Honestly.
Well, and we mentioned their podcast. So indeed, we should have started out with that you have been running the fantastic Archaeo Animals podcast, which I think then by the time this episode goes out, the last episode of your podcast will be out as we're coming out mid-December. So I don't know.
It probably will be. So we did over about 5.5 years, basically.
Wow.
So good run. You know, things have to come to an end. I think at some point we would run out of actual topics. You can only talk so much about animal bones, I think. We were really starting to stretch for material, but it was good. You know, we had really good feedback from people and lots of people who emailed us saying like, you know, this is the first time they've ever even heard of zooarchaeology. That was the whole point of the podcast.
Yeah.
And I know there's people who ended up doing podcasts because of the thing.
Influencer.
So,
Yeah, nice. Well, I mean, I love your podcast. I especially like the ones, as you can probably tell, because we started this podcast, I especially like the ones which they're like fantastical creatures or the kind of, what was the word? There was a word that you used in the titles and I can't remember what it is now.
Cryptids.
Yes, that's the one.
Cryptids, Mothman.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that aren't actually based in science or zooarchaeology are, I think, the ones that are most popular, strangely enough.
Well,
We tried to put zooarchaeology in everything, and sometimes that means we decide to talk about video games we liked or whatever. It's fine.
Well, we've, made a whole podcast out of it now, but just being able to talk about fantasy. Although, so before we go into that, though, so obviously you are a fan of zooarchaeology, if it's, perpetrating every part of your life, it sounds like. What do you enjoy about this topic? Why did you get into zooarchaeology in particular?
Okay, so the kind of professional, thought-provoking answer is that I do find like the fact that animals really embody so much of like everything. It's not just, looking at animal bones. It's thinking about how people think about animals. It's how people interact with animals, how animals interact with the environment, symbolism. It's really interesting for me, especially for someone who came originally from a anthropological background, more so than an archaeological one in my undergrad. The actual answer is that people want you to know so much about human bone, and I found it so overwhelming and made me so stressed out that I realized in zooarchaeology, people are just happy that you know the difference between like a dog and a horse. And those kind of bare minimum, kind of like low standards is something I strive for. So I ended up doing zooarchaeology. Although, joke's on me, I ended up doing a fair amount of human osteology in my PhD.
There you go. It's karma.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, zooarchaeology is actually quite difficult as far as how much you have to know.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's people who are much better at it than I am. I'm very much someone who still needs to like have a reference collection. There's people who are like, they can tell you the bone, the side, the age of the animal. Like my brain doesn't work like that. I just look at the bone and I'm like, that's not human. And give me 5 minutes and we can work from there.
Well, but I feel like a lot of zooarchaeologists specialize in a particular animal or at least species or something. But it sounds like you are a lot broader. So that must be a lot more difficult indeed to be able to have like all of that knowledge in your brain in one time.
As specific as I got was more like I said, later prehistoric Britain, but also really specifically like ritual and funerary approaches to zooarchaeology. So it's still, I think maybe it's the kind of abstract, esoteric stuff that I'm more drawn to. To be fair, I did try to become a fishbone person in my master's, and that was horrible. I'd never do it again. 0 out of 10. Worst 3 months of my life.
I work with a lot of fishbone people and I look at the work they do and think, how? How are you finding this enjoyable?
They are God's strongest soldiers.
Oh, yeah. And so, I mean, that's the most exciting thing or the nice thing about it. But I imagine that there's also negative aspects potentially to zooarchaeology in particular, or something that's frustrating about it, or is it all roses?
I think it's sometimes undervalued by non-zooarchs in that, it's a very common attitude, I feel like, of people kind of, if you're not a zooarch and you like run into some animal bones, it's like, ugh, like, ugh, I'm gonna deal with this. And like, I share that sentiment with, again, fish bones, small like rodent bones,
There's so many
amphibians, which I've like literally never looked at in my life, and I probably have, I just don't know it. But I think as much as I dislike those small bones, I do also know that there's so much you can learn about it. Like something like amphibians can tell you so much about the environment or like past environments, and as painful as it is to have to look at these tiny bones, it's kind of worth it sometimes. So that was part of the reason why we started the podcast is, one, I didn't think a lot of people even knew about zooarchaeology, and two, I felt like even in the field, it was kind of, undervalued. So I'd hoped maybe this would help. I don't think we've helped. In fact, I'm sure we've probably like dinged the reputation a bit more. So. But, we tried. It's fine.
And so now you said you're working with museum work a lot. You're writing up all the papers for your PhD research. I mean, should I ask if there's any other plans for the future, or is that a question I should steer clear of?
I mean, as a migrant, I would like to just live in this country for the next couple of years. Yeah, it's the thing where so I'm doing my postdoc work, right? I'm on my second postdoc, and my postdoc supervisors have been great because they're always really keen on professional development. But whenever they ask me like, oh, what are your career plans? I'm always like, I'd like to pay my rent. I'd like to be able to afford to eat. And it's like really hard to get out of the survival mindset, which I don't think the PhD helps. Like, I think in an ideal world, it'd be great to use the PhD to really think about your career. But meanwhile, I think for most people these days, it's kind of like, all right, well, what am I going to do in a few months?
4 years paid, great. What next? Yeah. Fair.
Especially in the UK as well. It's absolute rubbish at the moment.
Yeah. Sorry to be a bummer, but
no. Well, moving on swiftly then. Hopefully. But of course, the rest of this podcast is about fantasy, which I will pass over to my fantasy expert here.
Oh, I'm the expert? Fantastic. But yeah, do you enjoy reading fantasy, Alex?
I mean, again, I'm going to be a bummer. I used to, but I think there's something like, I don't know if it's just me, but I think when you start your PhD, your brain just is like, I can't read anything that's not hard, like nonfiction, like papers. Like I've read loads of nonfiction the last 4 years. And whenever I have to try and read something, not even fantasy, just fiction, I actually really struggle with it. And
a lot of people say that, don't they? Especially during their PhD. It's really difficult to kind of separate because you feel like all of your time needs to be taken up by research and reading and...
Or even if you don't have the guilt factor of it, it's just the fact that like Alex said, I mean, even for master's or bachelor's students as well, I've heard the same thing, right? That it's just, you're so mentally exhausted at the end of a day that you can't, focus too much on.
I think it's because you are learning, especially even in your undergrad, you're learning a new way of reading. And then once your brain goes into that mode, it's really hard to get out of it, especially when you're obviously the sciences. So, before that, you are reading a lot of fiction because of school, because it's part of your curriculum. And then after that, you're so focused, it's really hard. And I mean, I do read, I try really hard to read fiction sometimes. It is kind of I do really like the Kingkiller Chronicles, which is probably the last fantasy I've read, which is The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear. I really like
heard of them. I haven't read them. Yeah.
Although again, it's one of those I don't know. Is there a equivalent in fantasy? Because you have hard science, right? Where it's very grounded in scientific fact. I feel like it's very similar. Hard fantasy is not the right word for it, but it's kind of
fantasy.
High fantasy and cozy fantasy, I guess, would be the opposite, which is my personal favorite.
There's a real science to. Magic has a kind of a logic to it, which I again might be how I got into it because my brain was so science focused that I could read it a bit easier because I was it's that, and it's one of those fantasy things that has a lot of lore, which I find, I guess this is also the anthropology bit of me thinking. I like that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of why I might try and finally read A Song of Ice and Fire. because I know that's very lore heavy.
I feel like that's like a very high fantasy one as well.
Yeah, lots of different perspectives and machinations that you have to follow. And I'm rubbish at keeping track of things. I have to sometimes note things down, like, yeah, this character has such and such. Because I'm like, what colour were their hair again? Like, what did they look like? I can't remember. I need to go back.
I give up on that stuff, I must say.
I mean, because I read when I was younger, probably too young to really read it, I read the Amber Chronicles, which is like a mix of fantasy and science fiction.
I know that one, yes. Yeah,
it's like, it's high fantasy, but then at some point there's like computers and stuff. And my dad gave it to me, and it's like 10 books, and he gave me like a really big volume that was all the books. And like I said, I think I was too young to really like, I wasn't that young, but I was like not old enough to really appreciate how dense it was. But I remember it being really interesting. So I might need to go back and reread that. But yeah, so fantasy.
So do you think that's like your favorite fantasy book? Do you have one? If it's maybe something you're going to dive back into, is there something that you're going to read apart from like A Song of Ice and Fire?
I think it is the Chronicles. I think that's one that I reread occasionally. Although I keep telling myself, like, you should stop rereading it and read something else, because clearly
I'm terrible with that as well.
It's bad. And like, I have a huge book log of just like loads of books I collected during my PhD that are on my like Kindle. And it's like 100 of them. And I'm just like, I need to stop. But it's really hard. I'm so weak.
Well, to distract you from the never-ending PBR list, we have a situation that we need your assistance with, which is why it's very convenient that we've met you here on this road. So we've been given a historic site to analyze. It's up in the mountains, lots of caves, big boulders. Don't even get me started on the mist, although actually at closer sight, it could be smoke. And indeed, when you look at the ground, it seems to be burnt in lots of different places. A lot of the structures that have been excavated so far appear to have been burnt down. Something that isn't burnt, however, is the burial of a huge creature, winged, almost serpent-like. And when you read the historic accounts of the region, it appears that there were indeed many dragons in the area who would often attack the settlements. However, this is where the situation gets a bit complicated, because this particular site was pointed out to us by a dragon. So she flew into the courtyard outside the office one morning, caused quite a stir, to put it mildly, and demanded that we discover the true nature of the site and find out as much as we can about the actual dragon buried there. So I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts. But first, I suggest that maybe we move off the road, find a nice sunny spot to maybe set up a picnic or something. So we'll go and find that, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. And this is just such a fantastic view. Great spot for a picnic. So Alex, now that we know a bit more about you, know a bit more about the situation, let's maybe get some familiarity with dragons and start thinking about how we tackle this problem. So first of all, what is your experience as a experienced zooarchaeologist and dragon rider? What experience do you have with kind of the mythology of dragons, or the background of how dragons came to be, shall we say?
I mean, yeah, I personally have not really experienced dragons as much in a zooarchaeological context. But I mean, I think dragons are, they're so ubiquitous. They're found across cultures. So I'm mixed. My mom's side of the family is from China. So obviously grew up with a lot of dragon paraphernalia. And obviously that's so much different than, say, dragons from Norse mythology. My dad's side of the family is from Norway. I also had a lot of Norwegian dragons. I was very dragon heavy childhood, I'd say.
You're really the perfect guest for this episode.
I know, yeah. And yet I'm not, my Chinese zodiac is not a dragon, unfortunately. I'm a rooster.
That would have been great.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, but I think my brother's a dragon. But yeah, no, I mean, I believe we even talked about dragons on a podcast episode on Archaeoanimals, because, God forbid we talk about real animals sometimes, more than the mythological ones. But we did an episode, I hate to talk about podcasts, but
that's fine.
I can share this with you because I think it's interesting, which is we did an episode about, how people in the past looked at fossils, because obviously they would run across them. So... Holy crap. Sorry. Someone
What was that?
Someone just lit a firework right outside my house.
Did someone just get shot?
No, I'm okay. Oh my god. Oh my god, it was a dragon.
It's coming for you.
Stop talking about it.
Scared me. I'm okay.
You okay?
Yeah. Anyway, so one of the things we found when we were like researching for the episode was so there's Adrian Mayer, who has this theory about how, you know, a lot of mythological creatures probably came from people in the past running into fossilized remains. So with dragons in particular, you know, you're thinking about like people running into dinosaurs or just generally large prehistoric mammals or reptiles, which is, to be fair, very debatable as a theory, but I kind of understand where that's coming from.
They say that about cyclopses too, don't they?
For dinosaur bones or for like other
early hominids?
Oh.
Yeah, they think that because of the stocky kind of build that they found in the caves around Greece, that they kind of conjured the myth of the Cyclops and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's either that or there is a species of dwarf elephant that is now extinct, obviously, but used to live in parts of Italy. Again, a lot of this is very debatable because, you know, we don't really have too much like substantial evidence for it. But like you can understand where that comes, like it makes sense in a logical way. I don't think that's the case for everything per se, but like with fossils, I mean, that's idea still exists because in China, dragon bones are referred to as longgu, which is, they're called dragon bones. That's dragon bones in Chinese. And they're used as an ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine. And they're basically just fossilized bone, like vertebral fragments of usually prehistoric mammals and reptiles, because there's so many regions in China that are just, they have so much fossils on it. Like there's a really big like fossil industry now in parts of China. So yeah, so that idea of fossilized bones as dragons still exists even today, which is really interesting.
But interesting that it is actually bones, because I read somewhere about the fact that Eye of Newt is actually like cinnamon or something, or I can't remember. Like, so everyone's like, I'm now going to be, talking about adding Eye of Newt to all of my Christmas, hot chocolates and all these sort of things. But dragon bones is actually still bones, so that's maybe not.
Yeah, a lot of animal products are actually really used in traditional Chinese medicine, so we do have a lot of that kind of sort of stuff still being used medicinally. And
I mean, I like that like you mentioned already, that it's sort of in all places really you have something to do with dragons. What's your favorite dragon-based mythology? Do you have one? Well, that sounds like a very specific question, but
I have one from Northumberland. We have dragons. It's actually kind of one of our only stories that survived kind of industrialization and all that. We don't really have many mythological stories anyway from the northeast of England, but we call them Wyrms.
Oh, but like W-Y-R-M.
R-M-S. Wyrms. And there's the Lamberton worm. And basically the Lamberton worm is this tiny little worm, little pink thing that was found, and the story goes, it was found in a well by a knight who was going off to the Crusades. Of course, he always goes off to the Crusades. And he was like, oh, look at this tiny little thing. It's so sad. I'll just throw it back in the well. But then when he goes off to the Crusades, the worm grows and grows and grows and eats all the livestock and then terrorizes the villagers. And it's like around Bamburgh Castle as well. It kidnaps a princess, but there's two versions of the stories where it's either his sister or his wife-to-be. And he comes back from the Crusades and he has to kill this dragon, and he kills the dragon, saves the princess. Presumably either she marries another person because that's all his way, or because it's his sister, or she marries her, which is the version where it's not his sister, and everyone's happy and the Lamberton worm has been slain. That's the story anyway.
That's like the classic dragon story though, really, right?
George and the Dragon kind of one,
kind of from Western Europe. I mean, like obviously in other parts of the world it's different. And I like, obviously, like Alex mentioned, the Chinese culture very big symbol. What I like as well is that it's always used as a symbol for something powerful. Like you never have like the soft dragon. It's always like, yes, the like the Welsh flag. It's, the authority of the king since I have a note here, 655 AD, where it was known as the Dragon of Cadwaladr, which I apologize sincerely to any Welsh listeners listening in and bemoaning my pronunciation. The king of Gwynedd. But yeah, so that's, the sort of classic one in the UK, but then indeed in ancient Chinese culture, it's always a symbol of imperial power. And then, there's all sorts of cool sculptures that have been found from what culture was it? The Hongshan culture, I believe, which is a Neolithic culture, where they have very famous sort of sculptures of dragons. And that's actually the earliest known 3D representation of a dragon, apparently, was found dating to the Hongshan culture, which is excavations in the city of Shifeng in Inner Mongolia. That was sort of the main excavation point that apparently these things were found. But yeah, so lots of interesting things. And I like that you mentioned, Alex, the fossils. I also had found there was something when I was looking up, why are indeed dragons all over the place? Apparently there were some other interesting theories. One of them was that people just have an instinctive fear of reptiles.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like I feel like someone has a bit of a snake phobia to be saying.
I mean, it's something I've been thinking about because this has been going viral again online. The video of the orangutan, like the baby orangutans being taught to fear snakes.
Wait, what?
Have you seen this? There's
No.
this video that goes around like every so often, and me and my partner, because we're very simple people, obviously spent an evening watching these videos. There's like the fort schools of like young orangutans who I'm not sure what the actual context is. I assume they must have been either reintroduced or something. Mm-hmm. And there's these people that go around and have fake snakes to like kind of ensure that they have that instinct to be afraid of snakes. So they'll put the snake out, and then there's these such cute videos of the baby orangutans really like holding each other in fear. And then a guy comes out and he has a stick, and then he shows them how to beat the fake snake to death with the stick. And then you see the orangutans picking up the stick and realizing, oh, we beat it to death. To kind of build those instincts into them. And I was like, oh yeah. I mean, personally, I love snakes. I think they're very cool.
Yeah,
and I always wanted a pet snake as a child, but I get it.
Yeah, I didn't know they had to teach them that.
It's one of those things. I guess it's like, teaching kids about fear of cars running them over and that kind of thing. It's sort of the
when you take the fake car out and then you take a stick and you beat the
right
the car.
and
you beat the car.
You have the ketchup bottle spatting blood everywhere. Being like, oh no.
I mean, that's kind of what we do in the U.S. I don't know if this is an international thing or a very specific American thing, but we have this thing called shattered dreams that a lot of high schools do, where I'm not joking.
Sounds bad already.
Yeah, it's like that name.
There's a big full-scale acting out of a car crash, and they always pick the most popular or loved student to fake die in the car crash, and they have a real ambulance come, a real hearse come, a real fire truck. Wow. It's like this whole thing they do to tell us to not, like drink drive and things like that. But I guess it's a very American thing to do all this spectacle, right?
Well, no, actually, we had that at school.
Okay, it's not just us.
No, but it was like a specialized like place that we went, and they showed you each like fear you can possibly have. Essentially, like here's a burnt down building. This is what happens when you put fireworks through a letterbox, and don't put your arm out for the subway because it's just going to get cut off, and like things like that. And they'd show you each one, and then they'd tell you these horrifying stories, and you'd be like, okay, I'll never do that, I swear.
For us, there was one with like cars, and you had to put your balloon. You had a balloon on like a weight, and then you had to put that as far from the car, like the closest point to the car that you thought you'd still be safe if you ran out in front of it, basically. And then so we had to all do that. And keep in mind, we're all like 8 years old, and like the woman came along and went to the first one and just stomped on it, and it burst. And she's like, "Well, this one's dead."
So you're saying that we all are orangutans, and we are being taught with a fake snake and a stick.
snakes. So actually, this, instinctive fear of reptiles thing is probably, it's not that much of an exaggeration, maybe.
Yeah, no,
maybe not.
Maybe the fear of the dragon, these tales of dragons was supposed to instill a fear of, I don't know, something.
I guess it depends,
Yeah.
Dragons do, not only they come in different forms, they mean different things to different people, right?
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Well, because I find that interesting, though, indeed, that there's got the different ones. So you've got the sort of power symbol, but is that also, is that fear or is that respect or is it a mixture of the two? I guess mixture.
Yeah, I mean, because dragons in China, even now, I have a personal family shrine, a lot of other Chinese diaspora do, and I have a little dragon statue on mine because it's it is a powerful image. It's about bravery and strength and stuff like that. But then we did an episode on medieval bestiaries where dragons were almost always an allegory for the devil.
Right.
Yeah, they become quite witchy, I think.
So
especially,
it really changes. Which I think that's why it's really interesting to talk about dragons, because it's a way to kind of look at ideas that people have around the world, how that changes due to cultural context, but how that also changes across time as well. Because dragons are cool now. Honestly.
Dragons are super cool. Khaleesi and all that, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Have you seen one? Haven't you seen one spray painted on the side of a van?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Tattoos everywhere with all.
Actually, I just realized while we were recording this, I was I have a dragon tattoo. It's on my leg.
There you go.
I have a Chinese dragon tattooed on me.
Yeah. No, and indeed, it's definitely, I just also find it really fascinating, like you say, that they've developed a lot and they've developed over time, but there's been pretty similar things in nearly all parts of the world. They have something to do with a serpent or a dragon or a worm or something like that. So it's
something wriggly.
Yeah, universal, really scaly. So I had to cut this discussion short, but I thought that over there was just a flock of crow spies from Dunlin, but actually I think it is a black rain cloud. So maybe we should pack up this picnic and take cover before we get drenched. So we need to cut this episode short of And My Trowel, but don't worry, we will be continuing next episode with part 2 with our special guest, Alex. In the meantime, if there's any suggestions people have for an episode that they've gotten from a fantasy book, maybe there's an archaeological concept you don't quite understand that maybe we can explain through fantasy, or perhaps there's something in a book that you want to find out about as an archaeologist, just get in contact with us via email or social media. All contact info, as well as some of the references to the points we've made today, can be found in the show notes.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.